Mark, and I'm really excited to be here. It's great to see you all. I don't know most of you, but I know a lot of you. Patagonia is one of my favorite places to come to and visit, and I work along the border and have for the last 14 years. And I've not ever spent as much time in the San Rafael Valley as I have the last couple of years, just because border wall is now being built there. And it's, I was excited that I didn't have work in this valley because it is one of the most spectacular places on the planet, the San Rafael Valley, in terms of biodiversity, in terms of beauty. And we didn't really find out until July that border wall was planned here. During the first Trump administration and all administrations before him, they did not plan to build a wall in this valley. That CBP is often said behind closed doors, there's no need for a wall, it's pointless. The CBP union, before Trump, before it became politically inappropriate to say so, said walls were ineffective as a term of blocking human migration, and especially in the San Rafael Valley. But here we are. So this is a place that I deeply love, and it's I wrote this book. A lot of this is from notes that started in 2019, 2020, and so the San Rafael doesn't appear very much in here, but that's where I published this just as they started building wall in San Rafael. So it was like I was in some of this, as Robert mentioned, I think we come to poetry, or people come to poetry. A lot of people think they don't care about poetry and it's not useful in their life, but if you think about the times that it does appear, it's often at a death or a birth or a place where regular language just doesn't work to communicate what you're experiencing. In some ways, poetry is there to describe heaven and hell. It's to describe really terrible situations or really beautiful situations in people's lives that aren't just easily spoken in other ways. And that's where I came to this poetry, this poetry book, is both of those things. So there are, I'll read some of the poems, but if you read the book, it's the work that I've been pushed into lately is often really tears at the brain, because in one sense I'm doing the most amazingly fun and beautiful work. I'm in beautiful places, monitoring amazing wildlife and seeing wildlife return to the United States that have been were extirpated dozens of decades ago. And so I brought this up in a couple of other situations. I might be out looking for endangered pygmy owls, and not too long ago, I guess it was 2 springs ago, I was out looking for them in a place that we weren't sure they still were, down by Buenos Aires National Wildlife Refuge. And I start hearing one, and I'm looking for one, and this just spring flowers are everywhere. And it's this most beautiful scene, and I'm finding this bird that I haven't ever seen with my own eyes. And it's just, I'm ecstatic. But at the same time, I turn over, and there's a sign of a migrant has died there. There was a cross, someone had put a cross in this place to mark that pathway. And I often use on my phone, I use this mapping service. And so I have critical habitat for wildlife, I have detections that I've made in those places, but I also have the Tucson sector coroner's report that puts dots for each of the people who have died in these locations, and we're talking over 10,000 dots that appear. And so in some ways I'm constantly, it's not part of my work to discuss or deal with human movement and the border. It's wildlife focused, but I'm human, and see those things, and it's intense. I mean, it's intense to deal with, and so I work through some of that in the book through poetry, because I think that was an easier way for me to access that. I want to start out though just quickly. Recently, I went back and looked at an essay I wrote in 2019, right before border wall started going up across the San Bernardino National Wildlife Refuge and Oregon Pipe Cactus National Monument and national park lands across the state. And I think it's helpful, it's almost an access point to the rest of this book. I think it reminds me of just, not that much younger, but the younger me at 2019. And, my son, for better or for worse, I'm a single dad. He's 12 now, but he was 5 at this time. I think it was, 2018 was probably when I wrote it and published in 2019. My son is also thinking through this because a lot of the questions I have, the issues that I worked through was, how do you maintain love and community? How do you maintain sanity? How do you raise a child in a place that's rapidly being militarized? Because some of this is, my son would go on to work with me in the field, and we're working beneath surveillance towers, and we're next to concertina wire, those kinds of things. So I just want to read this really quick. It's a short essay that I wrote, and it published in Orion magazine. I don't know if anybody's ever read that. It's a nice magazine that's kind of a literary journal on environmental writing. But I'll read this first. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yeah.
My son, just 5 years old and spry, shambles down a small, dry desert wash beneath junipers and ocotillo, mumbling a song. I listen to his words, mostly fun, nonsense, rhyming words, for a hint that he gets it, that he gets the wonderful and desperate science of this place. His singing suddenly stops. "Feet," he yells. He's found a bear track in the sand near a holdout of water. Snowmelt from the 9,000-foot peaks of the Chiricahua Mountains that rise just north of the U.S.-Mexico border. We see the claw points, heavy toes, and metacarpal pads dug in deep where the bear leaned in heavy for a drink. We can almost hear an ursine tongue lapping the ephemeral water. Further on, mouse bones bleach under a sad flower, and my son collects a femur so tiny that he has to ask me if it's a butterfly's bones. We come to this spot, traditional land of the Apache, several times a year, not for its beauty necessarily, because it must be told that much of the landscape seems to bend with want, but because it sits at the crossroads of 4 incredibly wild and diverse communities that I monitor with remote cameras for the Center for Biological Diversity. This area is, to borrow the parlance of Sedona hippies, a vortex of sorts. The bear tracks mark the place where the biotic communities of the Colorado Plateau, which is up here, lumber down from the north to mingle with the biotic communities of the Sierra Madre. And it's down here. That prowl up from Mexico. Likewise, the drinking hole the bear slurped from sits right where the Sonoran Desert to the west and the Chihuahuan Desert to the east collide, transition, and blur. If biotic communities were recognized nations, then this wash and the hillocks that surround it would definitely be an international highway running through a multicultural border town. Desert cacti, grasslands, evergreen, and temperate forests smashed together over several thousand feet of elevation gain before being battered by deadly aridity and extreme heat, only to later be confounded by monstrous monsoon rains and the occasional blanket of snow. Biogeographic transition zones like this make strange bedfellows. During one remote camera check not long ago, my son and I flipped through video footage captured over a few weeks and saw coatis, javelinas, deer, ringtail, mountain lions, one human with a metal detector, one human with an assault rifle, 3 humans with light packs and weary gaits who seemed to be looking for a new start. We saw a roadrunner, a red-tailed hawk, a turkey vulture, a Gould's turkey, cows, gray foxes, bobcats, and a black bear cub. We saw 2 mountain lions and a spider crawling across the limbs. Then we saw a jaguar. We must have sat speechless for almost a minute, though this would be the 3rd wild jaguar spotted in Arizona since 2015, and the historic record shows that they've lived in the Southwest for millennia. It's not the kind of thing that registers with modern American desert dwellers right away. Most jaguars this side of the border were wiped out by the early 20th century. In the video clip, which I'm going to show, a handsome male jaguar sits roughly 3 feet from our camera, facing the lens, dappled and made more mysterious in the infrared black and white. He's in a moment of rest and contemplation at 2 a.m., ghostly and comfortable. We both lost it. "Is that for real?" my son asked. I sometimes bring my kid on these work trips to toughen him up. But that language is more convenient, saltier than precise. Besides helping him grow his hiking legs and grit, I want to teach him to be tender and open to the inconspicuous beauty that lurks out here. Walk smartly, I'll say. Don't trample a hedgehog cactus or step on a rattler. I want him to learn to value emptiness and biodiversity, and he does. He pauses at every bug, fungus, and track. He stops at overlooks to look at nothing but distance, range after range unfolding. He stoops to examine the purple blooms of a solitary taper-tip onion, but doesn't care about its name. He seems at peace in this world of pollen, canyon wrens, compound eyes, and dry breezes that rob the body of moisture. And despite the number of thorns and incisors and stingers here, it's an incredibly delicate place, and it's in danger. Viewed from news feeds, these borderlands are to some poorly regarded, empty wastelands. Yet my son and I have experienced firsthand a jaguar rewilding this place, creeping up from the northernmost breeding population some 150 miles south of the border. In 2014, under the Endangered Species Act, more than 750,000 acres of critical habitat in southern Arizona and New Mexico were protected for jaguars. This is some of the most outrageously wild land in North America. Driving home, we hear talk of border wall expansion on the radio. My son is still so young, but living here, he can't help but know. We drive through checkpoints, cringe at concertina wire, hear about his school friends' parents held in custody by ICE. In the distance, we see fragments of a patchwork wall constructed by previous administrations, a concrete scar. I'm hoping my boy senses that not all borders are so rigid, so alien and cold. I hope to teach him that the desert has its own beautiful borders, wild borders that are fragile and built of heart and photosynthesis and hunger and reciprocity, wild borders that follow the constraints of only sky and terrain, rain and sun and longing. So that's the essay from 2019. I just want to show you the video that says it. Those are the same videos coming up. Alright, here's the video. This is what this essay was about. These are some of the videos from there. You like to check the battery voltage. Alright, so fast forward basically, to 2020, this essay was like, oh, there's something shitty is coming, but it hadn't quite happened, and I was anticipating it, around 2019, the Trump administration really started building a border wall. It took a little while to get the funding and all that kind of stuff, but just really ran it into places that no one, including CBP, had ever suggested before that there would be border wall. It became a campaign promise. It also, there's this concept, it's a little cliche, but the military-industrial complex. There's very clearly in the last decade something like the border industrial complex, which is there are dozens and dozens of startup companies that create new surveillance equipment, new every aspect of the wall is now highly monetized. And, as we saw on this first time, groups like Fisher, Sand, and Gravel would go on Fox News and then get a contract the next day, inflating the ego of the president at the time. And these border walls cost roughly, in easy terrain, 10 million a mile. In difficult terrain can be 30 or 40 million a mile. It's largely a boondoggle and fairly ineffective. Border Patrol has said clearly that it might buy them 5 minutes, because that's about how long it takes a human to cut through something you get at an Ace Hardware store. What can't fit through the wall, though, generally is larger wildlife. So mountain lions, black bears, pronghorn, and deer, those kinds of things. And many other wildlife just simply will not move through the small holes. There was a study recently about moths avoid the wall. They don't pass through the wall, even though there are 4-inch gaps. But moths, something about a wind tunnel effect, and just pushes them away. At the same time, they also built lighting, which thank God they never turned on. But if they do, it's estimated that 70% of wildlife is nocturnal. And so blasting a wall of light through these wild places, this is the San Pedro River right here. And just to put that in context, the San Pedro River, boasts more vertebrate species, so species with a backbone, than Yellowstone National Park and Yosemite National Park. It's a real biodiversity hotspot. And half of the bird species that you can find in the United States or Canada can be found on San Pedro. So the bird diversity there is incredible. And so I spent a lot of my job, and a lot of the book is sort of, in some ways, I apologize, because some of it is dealing with just the trauma of staring at a wall being built with very little recourse. I work for the Center for Biological Diversity, and our lawyers are super badass, and we win all the time. But the border wall, because of this Real ID Act that was passed by Congress, post 9/11, kind of that fearful moment that Al-Qaeda would stream across the border or something, they can waive all laws, which means they can waive every tool that we use. The Endangered Species Act, Clean Water Act. They can blast, Native American burial sites and cultural sites, because they can waive the Native American Graves Protection Act. So in many ways, for the federal government, the border is truly lawless. They don't have any responsibility whatsoever to just build the wall. The wall doesn't even have to be, they don't even have to prove that it's functional, which is also one of the laws that they waive. It's engineering, sound engineering, and it meets a stated goal. If they actually tested the stated goal, it wouldn't bear fruit. And so this happened across, this is the Atascosa Highlands, this is jaguar critical habitat near Sycamore Canyon. And that every day, for the last 6 years since they did this, construction crews have to go out there and stabilize that, because the entire thing wants to collapse. It looks like a mountaintop removal site. This is the Cabeza Prieta National Wildlife Refuge. This is the Tinajas Altas Mountains, and you can kind of see how crazy it is to even think that this mountain is right next to the wall. This mountain is already a wall, and this is it's sort of a monument to a goal. Quito Baquito Springs, millennial-old spring right on the border that's significant. Cultural site, burial site to Hihachedoacan and Tohonacan. The wall is there, and you can see there's light poles back there. They blasted mountains like they're now doing in the San Rafael and the Huachucas. And so all of the beautiful footage you saw on the trail cameras, we now see things like this. This is Sky Island Alliance has put cameras near the new border walls. That's a wildlife crossing that they built, but they're only about the size of the bread box, and the lions can't get through. Even the turkeys can't figure it out. And of course, you know, there's places like Nogales, and this has been going on long before Trump for sure, but this is what militarization looks like. And people sit on different sides of the fence on what to do about migration, but I think there's no denying that there's an intense trauma for people or kids who go through this, and this militarization of the border. You know, can there ever be a de-escalation, a demilitarization of the border? You know, that's happened before. The Berlin Wall's been brought down. We've seen those kinds of things. I don't have answers for all of that. And then just to bring us up to speed, you know, San Rafael Valley, I took this 6 months ago, and this is just kind of a visual update of what it's looking like there. Moving through the big concrete batch plant and, you know, moving forward. Okay, so I'm going to stop there and then just maybe read a few poems to give a sense. Robert mentioned, I marked several of those names. I'm going to go with a non-border poem for a moment first. It's, you know, one thing, especially on Valentine's, you know, I know this is really dark and depressing, but it's dark and depressing because there's things that we love, you know, and it's a two-sided coin, and I don't know how, you know, to deal one without the other. But, you know, I have, the Harshal Cemetery by the ghost town. I don't know if folks have been to the cemetery. I used to go there every summer in the monsoons because I want to see this moth. It took me 3 monsoons before I saw the moth, but it's the Patagonia silk-eyed moth. It only lives in the cemetery at the ghost town of Harshal. And maybe one other isolated sky island in Mexico that population is unclear if it's still viable. And so it's just there. You know, one wildfire through the cemetery could potentially end this. And if you go at night and you put some lights out on a sheet and you deal with all of the bugs all over your face, you might see one, and they're quite large and beautiful. But I wrote this poem about Harshal Cemetery, and I'll read that one now. So it's one day I'll go again. I have this fantasy that I would be buried at Harshal. I would like to be buried there, just to like be buried in a complicated place that like is both beautiful and tragic. So one day I'll go again. Patagonia Mountains, Tucson sector, and a lot of the poems end with Tucson sector because that's the Border Patrol sector. It's huge. It goes basically from the border with New Mexico all the way over to Yuma. But it's just there they go. One day I will go again to Harshal Cemetery to sit at night with the dead-end moths, quivering in the frenzy of pupae laid on the tall grass. Beside Harshal Creek and the acre-feet of discharge, I'll sit with Automeris patagoniensis. Beside the fabric and plastic flowers half melted, half mildewed from summer heat and rain. I'll live my life to achieve this one moment again, sighing with the anxious wings annoying my face, and the moth there get all over your face. Like them, I can only know the last thing, the cemetery adjacent to the ghost town of Harshal. The ancient caretaker brings new plastic flowers and the noises of the zinc mine. It's a short drive to the grassland's border and the open graves. The pronghorn at the bollards and concertina turn away. Every trove and working of my love and sorrow steeped in this. The drain oak, badger, ocelot stain my face to germinate this. I'm afraid of the witch throat of the Mexican owl, the wild sorrow of his eye, and the absence of light. of a similar absence. The moths, I hope, might erupt and make a map of me, against all I am and all where I stood by and may not, the topography of the nothing of me that will remain for the good. To mark the terrain, identify the gulch and riparian pools, the tiger salamanders browning. The dough of them I would restore in myself, kissing the handmade crosses, placed for the desperate wanderers who stopped before me and behind.